Hey guys, welcome back. We are going to be doing chapter 21 of our book, The People's History in the United States by Howard Zinn. We are almost done. We've got, I think, one or two more chapters left. And a little teaser, we will be starting another book here in a few days. Some of you guys might already know what it is, or even be a fan of this franchise genre even. When I do display the book, you might hopefully recognize it, and you guys will enjoy that. I have enjoyed this book that we've been reading so far. I know it's a little tiresome to kind of hear the same book for about a year now. And as I said before, we are going to be having a lot of content coming out over the next week and a half ish. Most of that content will be, well, it's really going to be a mix of everything. I'm going to have some reading videos like this. I'm going to have some trigger based videos like the shorts you've been seeing. Go do a bunch of those. Some more tier list videos as well, because I see you guys have been very fond of those, as well as some cooking shorts. There might be one or two, like maybe 10-15 minute actual like cooking videos. The rest are just gonna be shorts and me chopping something or cooking something in the pan or whatever it might be. So I'm excited to present that to you guys later tonight. This video that you're seeing will be uploaded tomorrow morning ish. So just to kind of let you guys know, that's going to be kind of my schedule, is recording a reading video and having uploaded the next day. All the cooking videos and shorts will be uploaded that night. The trigger shorts will be uploaded the same day. So just so you guys have something to watch waiting for the longer content for the next day. So if that makes sense. Besides that, hope everyone's doing well, staying safe, had a great Valentine's Day as well. And let's get back into it for chapter 21. Carter-Reagan Bush, the bipartisan consensus. Halfway through the 20th century, the historian Richard Hofstadter, in his book The American Political Tradition, examined our important national leaders, from Jefferson and Jackson to Herbert Hoover and the two Roosevelts, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives. Hofstadter concluded that, quote, the range of vision embraced by the primary contestants and the major parties has always been bounded by the horizons of property and enterprise. They have accepted the economic virtues of capitalist culture as necessary qualities of man. That culture has been intensely nationalistic. Coming to the end of the century, observing its last 25-year histories, we have seen exactly that limited vision Hofstadter talked about, a capitalist encouragement of enormous fortunes alongside desperate poverty, a nationalistic acceptance of war and preparations for war. Governmental power swung from Republicans and Democrats and back again, but neither party showed itself capable of going beyond that vision. Now, what he's talking about is, it is very common in America, because Americans kind of have that 2-week amnesia. Well, that's also the reason why every midterm or presidential cycle, the House and Senate and the presidential office flips from Republican to Democrat or split chambers. But also saying that, maybe you guys have seen this chart before. If not, okay, but ever since America's founding, we've always been at war with someone. We've always toppled government somewhere. We've always funded some rebellion somewhere in the middle of Nowheresville. So it's just a common theme in American politics, especially during this period, in the late 70s, 80s, and early 90s. After the disastrous war in Vietnam came the scandals of Watergate. There was a deepening economic insecurity for much of the population, along with environmental deterioration, and growing culture of violence and family disarray. Now, kind of what they're talking about here is this is the end of the Woodstock era, the rock and roll, drugs, and sex era. Now we're going into more of the conservative era. Drugs are bad, sex is bad, abstinence is good, rock music is bad for children, it's a bad influence, we can't do that. That's the first part, but the environmental deterioration was going on for a long time now. Of course, Nixon implemented the EPA, Carter had a lot of, these solar water heaters on the White House. He funded projects, and they came to be with electric trolley railways and more pro renewable energy and anti-climate and combating climate change, which Reagan ripped to shreds when he came to office. Clearly, such fundamental problems cannot be solved without bold changes in the social and economic structure. But no major party candidates proposed such changes. The quote, American political tradition held fast. In recognition of this, perhaps only vaguely conscious of this, voters stayed away from the polls in large numbers or voted without enthusiasm. More and more, they declared, if not only by non-participation, their alienation from the political system. In 1960, 63% of those eligible to vote voted in the presidential election. By 1976, this figure had dropped by 53%. In a CBS News and New York Times survey, over half of the respondents said that public officials didn't care about people like them. A typical response came from a plumber, quote, the President of the United States isn't going to solve our problems. The problems are too big. Think about that. Let it soak in. There was a troubling incongruity in the society. Electoral politics dominated the press and television screens, and the doings of presidents, members of Congress, Supreme Court justices, and other officials were treated as if they constituted the history of the country. Yet there was something artificial in all of this, something pumped up, a straining to persuade a skeptical public that this was all that they must rest their hopes for the future. In Washington, politics, none of whom were inspiring, because it seemed that behind the bombast, the rhetoric, the promises, their major concern was their own political power. And to emphasize that, and to quote the late George Carlin, was the government only cares about themselves, its own power, and never give a shit about you, and it doesn't. That's just enforcing what they're saying in this book right here. The distance between politics and the people were reflected clearly in the culture. Like I said earlier, the culture was, okay, we're the laborers, we have strong labor unions, we are community, we work together. Like I said, during the late 70s era, hey, we're the rebels to the establishment. We're going to kind of do whatever we want. And that's what they're referring to here. And what was supposed to be the best of the media, uncontrolled by corporate interest, that is, in public television, the public was largely invisible. On a leading political forum on public television, the nightly, quote, McNeil-Lehrer report, the public was uninvited except as a viewer of an endless parade of congressmen, senators, government bureaucrats, experts of various kinds. On commercial radio, the usual narrow band of consensus, excluding fundamental criticism, was especially apparent in the mid-1980s, with Ronald Reagan as president, the, quote, fairness doctrine. Give me one moment because my book fell out of my hands, and now I have to go back to where I was. But here's some page turning for you guys who like page turning. Listen to that. Kind of sounds nice depending on who's doing it. Kind of get back to where I was here. Not too far. A little bit more. Okay, here. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, yeah. The Federal Communications Commission, requiring airtime for dissenting views, was eliminated by the 1990s. Quote, talk radio had perhaps 20 million listeners, treated the daily tirades from right-wing talk show hosts with left-wing guests uninvited. A citizenry disillusioned with politics, and with what pretended to be intelligent discussions of politics turned its attention, or had its attention turned, to entertainment, to gossip, to 10,000 schemes for self-help, which you see with Jordan Peterson and other people today. Now, the whole entertainment gossip thing, the media went from being the watchdog from the on-the-ground news reporter. We're going to be the investigators. We're going to report you to the news. We're going to stay with the facts and hard questions. Now they're relying on infotainment, entertainment, where, hey, we're going to, you know what I mean, if you've ever watched cable news. Okay. Those at its margins became violent, finding scapegoats within one's group, as with poor black on poor black violence, or against other races, immigrants, demonized foreigners, welfare mothers, minor criminals standing in for untouchable major criminals. There were other citizens, those who tried to hold on to ideas and ideals still remembered from the 60s and early 70s, not just by recollecting, but by acting. Indeed, all across the country, there was a part of the public unmentioned, in the media, ignored by political leaders, energetically active in thousands of local groups around the country. These organized groups were campaigning for environmental protection or women's rights or decent health care, including anguished concern about the horrors of AIDS, or housing for the homeless, or against military spending. This activism was unlike that of the 60s, when the surge of protests against race segregation and war became an overwhelming national force. It struggled uphill against countless political leaders trying to reach fellow Americans, most of whom saw little hope in either the politics of voting or the politics of protest. The presidency of Jim McCarter, covering the years of 1977 to 80, seemed an attempt by one part of the establishment that represented the Democratic Party to recapture a disillusioned citizenry. But Carter, despite a few gestures toward black people and the poor, despite talk of, quote, human rights abroad, remained within the historic political boundaries of the American system, protecting corporate wealth and power, maintaining a huge military machine that drained the national wealth, allying the United States with right-wing tyrannies abroad. That's the dark side of Carter's administration. Now, Carter also is one of the best post-presidents we've probably had in a long time. The thing about Carter is he was the wrong president at the wrong time. If Carter would have been president prior or afterwards, his administration probably would have been very different. Carter seemed to be the choice of the international group of powerful influence wielders, the Trilateral Commission. Two founding members of the commission, according to the Far Eastern Economic Review, David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski, thought Carter was the right person for the presidential election in 1976, given that, quote, the Watergate-plagued Republican Party was a sure loser. And it was. Carter's job as president, from the point of view of the establishment, was to halt the rushing disappointment of the American people with the government, with the economic system, with disastrous military ventures abroad. In his campaign, he tried to speak to the disillusioned and angry. His strongest appeal was to blacks, whose rebellion in the late 60s was the most frightening challenge to authority since the labor and unemployed surges in the 30s. His appeal was, quote, populist. That is, he appealed to various elements of American society who saw themselves beleaguered by the powerful and wealthy, although he himself was a millionaire peanut grower, which, by the way, he had to sell his peanut farm before he became president. Unlike other presidents now, with conflict of interest, owning businesses, etc., they get away with it. He had to do the opposite. He presented himself as an ordinary American farmer, although he had been a supporter of the Vietnam War until its end. He presented himself as a sympathizer with those who had been against the war, and he appealed to many of the young rebels of the 60s by his promise to cut the military budget. And a much publicized speech to lawyers, Carter spoke out against the use of the law to protect the rich. He appointed the black woman Patricia Harris as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and a black civil rights veteran, Andrew Young, as Ambassador to the United Nations. He gave the job of heading the Domestic Youth Service Corps to a young former anti-war activist, Sam Brown. His most kind of sounds like the Biden administration with his cabinet members. His most crucial appointments, however, were in keeping with the Trilateral Commission report of Harvard political scientist Samuel Huntington, which said that whatever groups voted for a president, once elected, quote, what counts then is his ability to mobilize support for the leaders of key institutions. Brzezinski, a traditional Cold War intellectual, became Carter's national security advisor. His Secretary of Defense, Harold Brown, had during the Vietnam War, according to the Pentagon Papers, quote, envisaged the elimination of virtually all the constraints under which the bombing then operated. Head Secretary of Energy James Schlesinger, as Secretary of Defense under Nixon, was described by a member of the Washington Press Corps as showing, quote, an almost missionary drive and seeking to reverse a downward trend in the defense budget. Schlesinger was also a strong proponent of nuclear energy, which is still highly debated to this day. His other cabinet appointees had strong corporate connections. A financial writer wrote, not long after Carter's election, quote, so far, Mr. Carter's actions commentary, and particularly his cabinet appointments, have been highly reassuring to the business community. Veteran Washington correspondent Tom Wicker wrote, quote, the available evidence is that Mr. Carter so far is opting for Wall Street's confidence. Carter did initiate more sophisticated policies towards governments that oppressed their own people. He used the United Nations Ambassador Andrew Young to build up goodwill for the United States among the black African nations and urged that South African liberalize its policies towards blacks. A peaceful settlement in South Africa was necessary for strategic reasons. South Africa was used for radar tracking systems. Also, it had important U.S. corporate investments and was a critical source of needed raw materials, diamonds especially. Natural resources also come to play against foreign policy. Therefore, what the United States needed was a stable government in South Africa. The continued oppression of blacks might create civil war. The same approach was used in other countries, combining practical strategic needs with the advancement of civil rights. But because the chief motivation was practicality and not humanity, there was a tendency towards token changes, as in Chile's release of a few political prisoners, when Congressman Herman Batllón introduced in Congress a proposal that required the U.S. representatives to the World Bank and other financial institutions to vote against loans to countries that systematically violated essential rights by the use of torture or imprisonment. Without trial, Carter sent a personal letter to every congressman urging the defeat of this amendment, and when it won a voice vote in the House, but lost in the Senate. Under Carter, the United States continued to support all over the world regimes that engaged in imprisonment of dissenters, torture, and mass murder in the Philippines, in Iran, and in Nicaragua, and Indonesia, where the inhabitants of East Timor were being annihilated, and a campaign bordering on genocide. Due to some time constraints and other needs, I'm going to go ahead and stop there, so the next time we can start chapter 22. Thank you guys for watching. Again, I really do appreciate all the likes, the comments, the viewership, just the support in general. Please remember to hit like, to hit the subscribe button, to press the notification bell so you guys see when these videos go up, and feel free to share my reading videos to their friends who love history and politics, those who are interested in tier list videos, those who want to listen to different triggers that maybe other artists don't do. I would really appreciate it, and it would mean a lot to this community to spread the word and to have a lot more members who are part of it. Besides that, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you later tonight and tomorrow.